The Galactic Council had been planning this for months. Their intelligence network had been observing Earth for years, tracking every move humanity made, every political shift, every scientific breakthrough. They believed that Earth, once a fledgling world, was ripe for the taking. The Council thought of themselves as the galaxy's most powerful force. They controlled countless star systems, their fleets could crush entire civilizations with ease, and they had vast resources at their disposal. But Earth was different. Earth was small, isolated, and fragmented. Humanity was still struggling to unite, still clawing its way through its own history of war, greed, and suffering. The Council knew it would be easy to force them into submission. The plan was simple: to demand that Earth surrender its resources, its advanced technology, and its people to the Council. The Council had decided it was time to reap what was sown. They had given Earth time to grow, but now they would take what was rightfully theirs. In their eyes, they believed that humanity would be too weak, too divided, to fight back. They would send an emissary, an ambassador, to deliver their demands. It would be a final warning: obey or face destruction. But Earth had never been a planet that obeyed easily. Its people had fought for every inch of their survival. No one could have predicted what would happen next. The Council's emissary was a figurehead, a symbol of their immense power. He arrived on Earth with a fleet of warships, shining with the pride of the Council's dominance. The ships hovered above the planet, blocking out the sun with their massive presence. From the moment the fleet appeared, humanity's governments knew something had gone terribly wrong. The news spread like wildfire, panic seeping into every corner of the world. Earth had never faced anything like this before. The emissary, a tall figure dressed in the dark armor of the Council, appeared on every screen across the globe. His voice was calm, cold, and filled with the authority of 1,000 star systems. "People of Earth," he began, his voice echoing in every home, every street, every corner of the world. "You stand before the Galactic Council, and you will do as we say. Your resources, your technology, and your very people will be handed over. Failure to comply will result in immediate destruction. Do not resist. There is no way you can win." His words sent chills down the spines of every human who heard them. But to the Council's surprise, the humans didn't panic. They didn't surrender. They looked up at the skies, not with fear, but with a determination that was as old as humanity itself. They had fought wars, survived disasters, and overcome the odds countless times before. This would be no different. As the emissary spoke, a sense of dread started to grow in the Council's camp. They had anticipated fear, maybe a brief resistance, but not this. They had expected Earth to fold, to beg for mercy. Instead, they saw defiance. They saw a planet that would not go quietly into the night. The Council's arrogance, however, had blinded them to the true strength of humanity. They had underestimated Earth in ways they couldn't imagine. The humans had not yet made their move, but they were already preparing. Their leaders, from the most powerful nations to the smallest resistance groups, began to communicate in secret. The world was coming together in a way the Council could not have predicted. Humanity's history of division had always been their greatest weakness. Now, it was their greatest strength. They were united, not under one banner, but under one cause: survival. The human response was calculated. It wasn't immediate, but it was coming. Earth wasn't going to bow to the Council's demands. They knew that resistance would be difficult, but they also knew they had one thing that the Council didn't. They had something to fight for. Earth wasn't just a planet to be conquered. It was a home, a place where every life mattered, and where every human was willing to fight for their freedom. Meanwhile, the Council was growing more impatient. They couldn't understand why the humans hadn't responded as expected. In their minds, they had already won. The emissary gave one final warning. "This is your last chance," he said, his tone darkening. "If you do not comply, the consequences will be catastrophic." The Council expected the humans to crumble under the pressure, But what they didn't know was that the humans were already thinking several steps ahead. On Earth, preparations were underway. Behind the scenes, a network of scientists, military leaders, and strategists worked tirelessly to find a way to fight back. The human response would be swift. It would be powerful, and above all, it would be unexpected. The Council's fleet might have the advantage in numbers, but humanity had something far more dangerous: their ingenuity. For the first time in history, Earth's leaders were working together, not out of politics or power struggles, but out of necessity. The humans were ready to show the galaxy what they were made of. The Council's emissary, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath him, watched as the Earthlings appeared to falter, and he smiled. He was sure they would submit. After all, what was Earth to the mighty Galactic Council? But deep within the heart of humanity, the will to survive burned brighter than the stars themselves. Earth was about to show the galaxy just how wrong they were about humanity. And so, the battle began. As the emissary's fleet loomed in Earth's skies, towering over the planet like a storm cloud ready to burst, the people of Earth waited. For the first time in decades, there was a unified feeling across the globe. Fear did not grip them. No, it was something else. A quiet confidence. The world's leaders knew that the Council had made a grave mistake in thinking they could push Earth around. The question was no longer whether Earth could resist. It was how long it would take for the Council to realize that humanity would not bow to their will. The Council, however, was still under the impression that their demands would be met without a fight. They waited and they watched, expecting Earth to crumble under the weight of their ultimatum. It was only a matter of time before humanity would beg for mercy. The emissary spoke again, his voice as cold and calculated as ever. "You have 36 hours. After that, we will begin our preparations to end your world as you know it. The choice is yours." But there was no surrender from Earth. Behind closed doors, a network of nations, once divided by borders and politics, had come together like never before. World leaders, military strategists, scientists, and engineers were all working toward a single goal: survival. Every single person on Earth knew what was at stake. Their homes, their families, their way of life, all of it could be lost in an instant if they didn't act. It wasn't just military strength they were relying on. Humanity had something more precious than that: innovation. Over the years, Earth had developed a vast array of technology, some of which had not yet been revealed to the public. Most of it was far beyond what the Council had seen from the planet. What the Council didn't understand was that Earth's greatest weapon wasn't in its ships or armies. It was in the minds of its people. And when those minds worked together, there was nothing the galaxy could throw at them that they couldn't overcome. The hours ticked down. With every passing minute, the tension mounted. The emissary's words echoed in every corner of the world, but they no longer held the power they once did. There was no panic, no fear. There was only resolve. Then the first shockwave hit. At first it was small, just a flicker in the sky. But then it grew. A brilliant burst of light, far brighter than any star, shot into the sky. The Council's ships above Earth began to shudder. A low hum filled the air, and for a moment, everything went silent. No one knew what had happened, but they could feel it. Something was wrong. The Council's fleet had experienced something they had never encountered: a disruption in their systems. In their arrogant belief that Earth was helpless, they had completely overlooked the one thing humanity had done in secret. On Earth, in the darkened war rooms, human engineers stood with their eyes wide. The disruption wasn't a random accident. It was a calculated attack, an interference designed specifically to undermine the Council's fleet. It was an electromagnetic pulse, but not any ordinary EMP. This was a weapon they had been developing in secret, one capable of short-circuiting the Council's ships from a distance. They hadn't expected it to work at first, but it did. Earth had just taken the first step in turning the tide. The Council's commanders scrambled to assess the situation. What had just happened? Their ships, their mighty weapons, had all gone dark. Systems were failing across the fleet. The emissary, furious and confused, ordered a full scan of Earth, trying to figure out how this was possible. But it wasn't the only surprise Earth had in store for them. While the Council's fleet struggled to regain control, a fleet of Earth's own was being prepared. This fleet wasn't as large as the Council's, nor as technologically advanced in some respects, but it had something the Council didn't. It had adaptability. Earth's forces had been training in secret for years, prepared for the worst-case scenario. They had already anticipated that they might have to fight an enemy with superior firepower. So they had adapted their technology to exploit the one thing the Council had never expected: their overconfidence. With the EMP now sending shockwaves through the Council's ships, the world's leaders gave the go-ahead. A counteroffensive was launched. The first strike came from Earth's ground forces. They had developed a fleet of smaller, more agile ships designed to travel undetected, with advanced cloaking technology that the Council had never seen. These ships were built to be fast and maneuverable, able to strike without warning and disappear before the enemy could retaliate. They hit the Council's fleet hard, taking out several of the larger vessels in a matter of hours. The strike was calculated and precise. Humanity had learned to fight with brains, not just brawn. The Council's commanders were in complete disarray. Their plans had been disrupted, their technology compromised, and now their enemies were striking back in ways they hadn't prepared for. The emissary, once so confident in his mission, began to realize the magnitude of the mistake the Council had made. Earth was fighting back, and they were doing it with a ferocity that could not be matched. At the heart of the human resistance was a man named John Caldwell, an ex-soldier who had once worked with the top military officials of the world. Now he was part of the elite group responsible for Earth's response. He had seen firsthand the damage that could be done when humanity came together. He had always believed in Earth's potential, but even he hadn't anticipated this level of unity and resolve. From the moment the Council's fleet had appeared, he knew this would be the fight of their lives. As John Caldwell watched the battle unfold from a command center in the heart of the United States, he felt a surge of pride. Humanity was no longer the underdog. They were the hunters now. The Council had underestimated Earth's ability to fight back. But this was just the beginning. The first battle was won, but the war was far from over. The Council had thought they could take Earth without effort, but now they were learning the hard way that humanity was not a race to be conquered. It was a force that could not be stopped once it had set its sights on survival. The message was clear: Earth was not going to kneel, and the Council was going to find out just how dangerous humanity could be when pushed to the brink. The emissary, his pride shattered, retreated to his flagship. His mind raced, trying to figure out what to do next. Earth was showing a strength they had never anticipated. The Council was in for a fight, and this fight would change the galaxy forever. The Council's shock was palpable as the full extent of Earth's response became clear. The fleet's sudden failure was a blow to their pride and their plans, and despite their best efforts to regain control, the damage had already been done. Humanity's first strike had caught them off guard in a way they never thought possible. The emissary, now shaken, retreated to his flagship, pacing angrily as he tried to comprehend what was unfolding before him. His pride had been wounded, and his belief in the inevitable subjugation of Earth was crumbling. The Council's commanders gathered in a tense meeting, trying to formulate a plan to salvage the situation. They had no idea how Earth had managed to hit them so hard, how their technological superiority had been so easily breached. The discussions turned heated as accusations flew across the room. Some of the commanders wanted to escalate the attack immediately, to bring Earth to its knees by unleashing their devastating weapons. Others, more cautious, warned against underestimating the enemy further. But the emissary, his face taut with frustration, silenced them all with a single cold command. "Get the fleets back into formation," he ordered, his voice icy with fury. "We are not here to negotiate. We will crush Earth, no matter what it takes." Back on Earth, however, the mood was one of quiet triumph. The first successful strike against the Council's fleet had been a miracle, But it was only the beginning. Humanity knew this wouldn't be an easy fight. The Council would not back down just because of a few damaged ships. There was much more to be done, and Earth's leaders knew they had to act quickly before the Council regrouped. In secret bunkers and underground command centers, the leaders of Earth's united forces met to strategize. John Caldwell, now one of the key military commanders, stood in the middle of a vast war room, studying the holographic map of the battlefield. The lines that represented the Council's fleet were still present, though fewer in number. The first assault had caused considerable damage, but it was not enough. The Council was regrouping, ready to counterattack. Caldwell's team was racing against time to develop new strategies that could tip the scales in humanity's favor. Caldwell, a voice interrupted his thoughts. It was Commander Valerie Hayes, a leader of Earth's unified fleet and one of the brightest minds in military strategy. We've got one shot at this. We need to hit them again before they can recover. The Council's getting stronger by the minute. Caldwell turned to her, his expression grim but determined. I know, but they've got too many ships. We need to hit their command center, the flagship. If we can take that down, we can destabilize their entire fleet. Hayes nodded. We've been working on a weapon. It's not ready, but if we can delay them long enough, we might be able to deploy it. Caldwell's mind raced. The Council's flagship was a massive, impenetrable fortress, its shields and weapons far superior to anything Earth had on hand. To take it down would require precision, speed, and something more, a game changer. He couldn't help but think back to the strange pulse that had disrupted the Council's fleet during the first strike. It wasn't just an EMP, there was something else at work. They had tapped into an unknown power, a power that Earth had yet to fully understand. But that would be their advantage. Earth's ability to innovate when faced with impossible odds. The clock was ticking. The Council was already launching a retaliation. Humanity's victory had been brief, and it was clear that the Council wasn't going to stop until they had Earth under their control. As Caldwell and Hayes discussed their strategy, far above them, the Council was preparing for the next phase of their assault. They had underestimated Earth's ingenuity, but they had learned their lesson. The emissary had ordered a full offensive, and this time, there would be no hesitation. The Council's warships began to power up their engines, their vast array of weapons locking into place, ready for the final assault. The flagship, still intact despite the earlier damage, moved into position at the head of the fleet. The emissary's voice rang out across the command channels. "This is your last warning, Earth," he said coldly. "You will surrender. Your resistance is futile. You will fall, as all those before you have. This is your final chance to save your world. Comply, and your people will be spared. Resist, and you will perish." The arrogance in his voice was unmistakable. He truly believed that Earth was at the edge of defeat. The Council had underestimated humanity's will to survive, and now it was going to cost them. But Earth wasn't backing down. As the enemy fleet charged toward Earth, Caldwell issued the order. It was time for humanity's next move. The fleet was ready, but they would need to act fast. Their new weapon, still experimental, still untested, was their best shot at taking down the flagship. But the risks were enormous. There was no guarantee that the weapon would work, and even if it did, the flagship's defenses were formidable. If the weapon failed, Earth's forces would be exposed to an all-out assault from the Council. But Caldwell had no choice. The alternative was surrender, and that was a fate humanity would never accept. The weapon was a modified form of the energy pulse that had disrupted the Council's fleet during the first attack, but with far greater power. It was designed to pierce through the shields of the flagship, disable its weapon systems, and create a chain reaction that could destroy the entire command ship. But to get close enough to fire it would require precision, stealth, and a level of bravery that only the humans on the front lines could provide. Caldwell watched as the fleet assembled, readying for the most dangerous mission Earth had ever attempted. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. Lives were on the line, his people's lives, and failure was not an option. He would not allow Earth to fall to the Council. Not after everything they had fought for, not after the sacrifices that had been made. The fleet moved into position. The Council's ships were approaching, their weapons locked and ready. The two forces were about to collide, and the fate of Earth would be decided in the next few hours. As the first volley of fire came from the Council's ships, Caldwell gripped the edge of the command console. His heart raced as the battle began. This was it, the moment of truth. Earth's resilience was about to be tested in ways no one could have imagined. The Council would soon discover that humanity was not to be underestimated. The fate of the galaxy itself might depend on the outcome of this single battle. For the first time in the fight, the Council began to falter. Their ships were taking damage from unexpected angles. Their communications were scrambled, their weapons malfunctioning. Earth's forces, though outgunned, were relentless. They were fighting not just for survival, but for the future of every human being alive. And through it all, the weapon was getting closer to firing. The Council's emissary, watching from his flagship, clenched his fists. He could see his fleet starting to unravel, and he could feel the tide turning. Earth wasn't going down without a fight. They had no idea what humanity was truly capable of. And now, it was too late for them to stop it. In that moment, the first strike from Earth's new weapon hit the Council's flagship. The resulting explosion rocked the battlefield. It wasn't over yet, but the battle had just shifted in humanity's favor. The emissary's face went pale as he watched his command ship crippled, knowing that the war for Earth's survival was far from finished. But the hope of victory had just been ignited. The smoke from the exploded flagship billowed into the vacuum of space, casting eerie shadows across the battlefield. The shockwaves reverberated through the Council's fleet, throwing the once mighty armada into chaos. The Council had never expected the kind of attack they had just witnessed. Their most formidable warship, their symbol of power, was now a massive, burning hulk drifting helplessly in space. It wasn't just the ship itself that had been destroyed. It was the very foundation of the Council's confidence. The attack had sent a message, loud and clear. Humanity wasn't just fighting to survive. They were fighting to win. The emissary, his face ashen, stood at the helm of his flagship, his hands trembling as he stared at the damage. The unexpected weapon Earth had deployed had breached their strongest defenses and brought their flagship to the brink of annihilation. There were fires raging on the flagship, and key systems were failing. The commanders aboard the other ships could only watch in horror as their greatest asset crumbled. "Status report," the emissary barked, his voice trembling with fury and disbelief. A fleet officer scrambled to provide an update. "Sir, the flagship's shields are down. Weapons systems are offline. Engines are destabilizing. We're losing power." The emissary slammed his fist into the console, his anger boiling over. This cannot be happening. How did they develop this technology? How did they bypass our defenses? "We don't know, sir," the officer stammered. "But we have to respond now. The rest of the fleet is scattered, and Earth's forces are closing in." On Earth, the mood was anything but one of celebration. Humanity's forces had just dealt a devastating blow to the Council, but they knew this was only the beginning. The destruction of the flagship was a significant victory, but the war was far from over. The Council's remaining fleet, though shaken, was still formidable. There was no room for complacency. If anything, the battle had just escalated to a new level. John Caldwell stood in the command center, his eyes scanning the holographic battlefield. The victory was still fresh, but the war was still raging. The Council was far from defeated, and their retaliatory strike was already underway. Earth's forces had taken the initiative, but now they had to hold the line. "The flagship's gone," Hayes said, her voice steady but tense. "But we know the Council won't stop. They'll retaliate with everything they have." Caldwell nodded, his gaze fixed on the tactical map. "We've just knocked the first domino down, but we're not out of the woods yet. The Council's forces are still formidable, and we can't underestimate them. We got one shot at this, and we can't afford any mistakes." The entire room was filled with a focused energy as the world's leaders and military officials worked together to form a plan. They had seen the Council's might firsthand. Their fleets, though damaged, still outnumbered Earth's. They had more advanced weapons, better shields, and technology that Earth had only just begun to understand. Caldwell knew that humanity's advantage wasn't in superior firepower. It was in their ingenuity, their resilience, and their unwillingness to surrender. As Earth's forces regrouped, the Council's fleet began to reorganize, their ships slowly coming back into formation. The emissary, though shaken, refused to surrender. He was a man who had built his career on crushing weaker civilizations, and the idea that Earth, this insignificant backwater planet, had dared to strike back was something he could not accept. "We will destroy them," he muttered to himself, his voice a low growl. "They are nothing. We will crush them underfoot." But even as he spoke, the Council's fleet began to pull back. The flagship was destroyed, and their remaining ships were scattered and disoriented. They had not anticipated Earth's power, and now they were struggling to regain their footing. The emissary knew that they needed to regroup, to pull together the full might of the Council before they could press forward. The coming hours were crucial. Caldwell knew the Council would retaliate with everything they had, and he couldn't allow Earth's momentum to slow. The plan was simple: hit them hard, hit them fast, and don't give them a chance to recover. In the next few hours, Earth's forces launched a second wave of attacks, focusing on the weaker points in the Council's fleet. The smaller ships, faster and more agile, weaved through the Council's ranks, striking with precision and disappearing before the enemy could counter. Earth's engineers, having studied the Council's ships in detail, had found weaknesses, blind spots in their shields, systems that could be overloaded with the right kind of energy. These were the targets now. The second wave was devastating. Earth's forces hit with a speed and precision that had once been impossible, but now, with their newfound knowledge of the enemy, they were turning the tide. It was as if Earth had tapped into some hidden well of power, a well of determination and resourcefulness that the Council had never anticipated. Back in the command center, Caldwell's pulse quickened as the battle unfolded on the holographic display. Ships were going down, one by one, as Earth's forces tore through the enemy fleet. He felt a surge of hope, but he knew the fight was far from over. The Council wasn't just going to roll over. They would fight back harder, more viciously than before, and if they had anything left to throw at Earth, it was going to come soon. As the battle raged on, a new threat emerged. From the heart of the Council's fleet came a massive warship, far larger and more heavily armed than any they had encountered. It was the Council's last-ditch effort, a ship capable of wiping out entire cities with a single strike. The emissary had called for reinforcements, his final ace in the hole. This new ship, a technological marvel, was unlike anything Earth had seen. John Caldwell stared at the approaching ship with grim determination. It was massive, its weapons glinting in the darkness of space. If Earth couldn't take it down, the war would be over. The Council would have their victory. But Caldwell refused to believe that. Earth had already proven their strength once, and they would do it again. The order was given. The fleet moved into position, bracing for the final confrontation. Earth's ships, though damaged, were still formidable. And they had something that the Council's new weapon didn't: a deep, burning will to protect everything they held dear. Caldwell knew they could win this. They had to. As the giant warship loomed closer, the final battle began. The fate of Earth, and perhaps the entire galaxy, was about to be decided. The atmosphere in the command center was thick with tension, a palpable hum of urgency that seemed to electrify the air. The massive Council warship, an imposing colossus of steel and advanced technology, loomed ahead, its weapons fully primed. The very presence of this behemoth sent shivers through Earth's forces. The stakes could not have been higher. The fate of Earth rested on the outcome of this one, Final confrontation. Caldwell's eyes locked onto the holographic display, watching as the enemy ship's shields flickered to life, radiating an intimidating blue glow. The Council was determined to make their last stand. "This is it," Hayes said quietly, her voice steady, but filled with resolve. She stood next to Caldwell, her eyes scanning the battle formation as Earth's forces took up their positions. "If we don't break through now, they'll sweep us aside. We can't afford to fail." Caldwell nodded, his thoughts racing. The second wave of attacks had weakened the Council, but now they were facing their greatest weapon, an invincible juggernaut. Earth's fleet had fought valiantly, but they were not as numerous, and their ships, though upgraded, were still inferior in terms of raw firepower and armor. The enemy warship dwarfed anything they had. It was a monster, and it was coming for Earth with the force of 1,000 storms. "Give me a status update on our fleets," Caldwell ordered, his voice low, almost a whisper, as he fought to maintain his composure. "We've sustained heavy losses," came the report from his tactical officer, "but we still have enough to put up a fight. The enemy warship's shields are nearly impenetrable, and its weapons have a range far greater than anything we've faced so far. We'll need to close the gap quickly before they can deploy their heavy artillery." Hayes looked at Caldwell, her expression unreadable. "We've got one shot. We need to hit their weak spots, the areas where their shields are thinnest. But to do that, we have to get in close enough for them to destroy us with a single shot. It's a suicide mission." Caldwell's heart pounded in his chest. He knew the risks, but there was no other choice. If the Council's warship wasn't taken down, Earth's resistance would crumble. The enemy's firepower would be devastating. Entire cities could be wiped off the map in an instant. Humanity could not afford to lose this fight. "I'm not asking anyone to die," Caldwell said, his voice hard with resolve. "But I am asking you to do everything you can to win. Every ship that can fight, every soul that can stand, will do so. We'll take down that ship, or we'll die trying." The room fell into a hushed silence. Earth's leaders, soldiers, and engineers all understood what was at stake. This wasn't just a battle. It was the final stand for everything they had worked for, everything they had fought to protect. There was no turning back now. With the order given, Earth's remaining fleet moved into formation, preparing for the final assault. Caldwell stood at the forefront, his hand steady on the controls, though his mind raced. The enemy warship was closing in fast, its colossal size and heavy weaponry making it seem like an unstoppable force. But Caldwell knew something the Council didn't. Earth's greatest strength wasn't in their technology. It was in their will to fight, in their sheer determination to survive. As the fleets engaged, the first barrage of fire from the Council's warship ripped through space, a blinding explosion of energy that shook the very stars around them. Earth's ships scattered, using evasive maneuvers to avoid the incoming fire. The Council's weapons were devastating. Each blast from their ship had the power to tear apart a fleet, and they were firing relentlessly. The fight was intense, the sound of cannon fire and exploding ships ringing in Caldwell's ears as the battle surged forward. "We're getting too close," Hayes called out from her station. "We can't keep dodging like this. We need to find an opening. Something, anything." Caldwell's eyes narrowed as he studied the enemy ship. Its shields were holding, but its firepower was concentrated on the smaller Earth ships. That was their opening. The larger ships, the ones with the most firepower, had to get close enough to attack the weak points in the enemy warship's hull. The tactical team had pinpointed a vulnerable spot near the warship's power core, a small gap in its defense where the shields were less effective. If they could strike there, it might disable the entire vessel. "Prepare to make the jump," Caldwell ordered, his voice calm but full of command. "All ships, follow my lead. We go in fast and hit them with everything we have. We make one strike and get out." The fleet's smaller ships, moving with impressive speed and precision, dove into the heart of the battle. Caldwell's flagship, along with the remaining large vessels, followed closely behind, each one bracing for the final push. The Council's ship loomed larger by the second, its massive guns charging for another devastating volley. Then, with a blinding flash of light, Earth's ships were in range. The tactical officers activated their special weapons, energy pulses designed to breach the warship's shields. The first shot hit, but the shields absorbed the blow with ease. The second pulse was more concentrated, focused directly on the weak spot near the power core. This time, the impact caused a ripple in the enemy ship's shields. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The warship's defenses flickered. "Keep firing," Caldwell commanded. "We've got one chance at this." Earth's fleet pressed forward, unleashing every weapon they had, pounding the weak point with everything in their arsenal. The massive warship returned fire, its guns lashing out in a fiery storm. But the gap in its shields was growing wider, the energy pulses punching through with increasing force. The Council was losing control of their ship, and they knew it. At that moment, a huge explosion erupted from the Council's warship, lighting up the battlefield in a burst of blinding white light. The shockwave sent a ripple through space, sending debris flying in all directions. Caldwell's heart skipped a beat as he saw the damage unfold on his screens. They had done it. The warship's power core had been hit, and the entire ship was beginning to break apart. "It's working," Hayes shouted, her voice filled with a mix of disbelief and triumph. But the Council wasn't done yet. In the chaos, they began launching their final weapon, a fleet of smaller, faster ships designed to make a last-ditch attack on Earth's forces. The remaining Council vessels closed in, desperate for revenge. "Hold tight, everyone," Caldwell shouted, rallying his fleet. "We're not finished yet. This fight is far from over." The battle raged on. Earth had just dealt a crippling blow, but the cost was high. Earth's ships were severely damaged, their resources dwindling. The final waves of Council ships were relentless, but humanity's resolve remained unbroken. Each ship that fought, each soldier that stood, proved that Earth was no longer the weak target the Council had once believed it to be. As the warship disintegrated in a spectacular explosion, the remaining Council fleet hesitated. They had lost their greatest weapon, the symbol of their power. The fight was far from won, but for the first time, the Council's leaders began to understand something they hadn't considered. Earth was a force to be reckoned with. Humanity's will to survive and fight had shattered their perception of what was possible. The next moments would determine the fate of Earth, whether they could push through the final wave and secure their survival, or if the Council would finally crush them underfoot. But in the heart of every human still fighting, there was a single truth that kept them moving forward. Earth would never give up. Not now. Not ever. The explosion that had torn apart the massive Council warship continued to burn brightly in space, casting an eerie glow over the battlefield. Earth's forces had dealt a crippling blow, but the war was far from over. The Council's remaining ships, though scattered and battered, were not ready to retreat. Their survival instinct had kicked in. These were not simply military commanders. They were the highest echelon of a powerful empire, men and women who would rather die than admit defeat. Caldwell stood on the command deck of his flagship, his hand steady but his mind racing. The victory over the Council's warship was a crucial one, but the damage had come at a heavy price. Earth's fleet had lost ships, soldiers, and vital resources. The remaining ships were battered, their weapons systems partially disabled from the relentless onslaught. They had taken down the symbol of the Council's might, but they still had to face the full force of the remaining fleet. "Report," Caldwell barked, his voice echoing through the tension-filled room. Hayes, standing by his side, turned to the tactical officer, who was frantically running damage reports on the fleet. The officer's face was pale, his hands trembling as he spoke. "Sir, we've lost 3 ships completely, and 4 more are heavily damaged. Weapons are offline on 2 of them, and shields are almost depleted. Our remaining fighters are still holding, but they're low on fuel and ammunition." Caldwell's jaw tightened. They had won, but the cost was steep. The enemy's reinforcements were now pouring in. Smaller, faster ships designed for hit-and-run tactics, their weapons still intact. They were no longer just fighting to defend Earth. Now they had to defend everything they held dear, every colony and every person who depended on them. He could see the Council's ships closing in, their tactics becoming more erratic, desperate. The enemy had no more heavy weapons, no more capital ships. All they had left were their smaller vessels, each one an extension of the Council's will. Their fleet, though crippled, still vastly outnumbered Earth's. "We're not out of options," Caldwell muttered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. "We fought too hard to lose it all now." He turned to Hayes, his eyes blazing with determination. "We've got one more strike left in us. If we can take down their command ship, the rest will fall apart. Without leadership, the fleet will scatter." Hayes nodded in agreement, her expression hardening. "We're going to need to make a desperate push, but if we don't act now, we'll be wiped out. We can't afford to wait any longer." Caldwell watched as his crew moved swiftly, coordinating efforts across the fleet. Each officer, soldier, and fighter pilot knew the stakes. They were on the brink of something huge. Earth's survival depended on them making this one final strike, or their world would be lost to the Council. He looked back at the tactical map, his mind already calculating their options. There was no turning back now. Earth had already made their mark on the galaxy, but this final battle would either cement their legacy or seal their fate. "Captain," the officer at the comm station called out, "we've intercepted a message from the Council flagship. They're sending a fleet of assault drones to overwhelm our defenses. They're desperate, Caldwell. This is their last play." "Drones?" Caldwell asked, the word laced with disbelief. "How many?" The officer grimaced, typing frantically into the console. "Thousands, sir. They've reconfigured their resources to launch everything they have left." Caldwell's stomach twisted. The drones would be nearly impossible to counter without the proper firepower. They were fast, agile, and relentless, designed specifically to exploit weaknesses in defensive formations. Earth's ships were already heavily damaged, and their remaining fighters were at risk of being overwhelmed. "We've got to take out their command ship," Hayes repeated, her voice urgent. "It's the only way to end this." Caldwell nodded, resolute. "Prepare the fleet. We're going in." The final assault was about to begin. As Earth's remaining ships began to move into position, Caldwell couldn't shake the feeling that this was their last chance. The Council's forces were closing in fast, their drones already beginning to take shape in the distance. Caldwell knew that their strategy depended on speed, surprise, and precision. If they could strike hard enough at the heart of the Council's fleet, they might be able to break their will to fight. But if they failed, if they hesitated even for a moment, Earth would be finished. "Ready the fighters," Caldwell ordered. "We'll need everything we have left to get through the drones. Once we break through, we move straight for their command ship. There's no time to waste." With military precision, Earth's forces sprang into action, their fighters launching from the hangars in perfect formation. The enemy drones were closing in, and the fleet began to scatter, each ship using evasive maneuvers to dodge the incoming waves of fire. In the midst of it all, the command ship appeared, massive and menacing, surrounded by a cloud of drones. Caldwell's flagship surged forward, breaking through the chaos as the fleet followed suit. The drones were relentless, but the Earth fleet's speed and coordination allowed them to push through the first wave. "Engage," Caldwell shouted as the gap between Earth's forces and the command ship grew smaller. "We've got one shot. Take them down." The fighters swarmed the command ship, their weapons firing in unison, tearing through the defenses. The drones fought back fiercely, but the sheer number of Earth's ships made it impossible for the Council to maintain a strong defensive line. One by one, drones were destroyed, their explosive remnants drifting through the vacuum of space. Caldwell's heart raced as he watched the battle unfold. The command ship was now within reach, its shields flickering under the concentrated fire of Earth's forces. The Council's leadership was desperate now, trying to reposition their final defensive line. But Earth's strategy was clear: eliminate the leadership, and the rest of the fleet would collapse. Target their main power core, Caldwell ordered, his voice sharp as he watched the command ship's energy signature flare on his screen. We hit them there, and we end it. As the fleet closed in on their target, the command ship unleashed its full firepower, lashing out with devastating beams of energy. The Earth ships scattered, dodging, and returning fire, doing everything they could to survive. Caldwell gritted his teeth, watching as his flagship absorbed a hit that sent a tremor through the hull. They couldn't afford to slow down. This was their moment. Brace for impact, Caldwell shouted to his crew, gripping the armrest of his command chair. The flagship rocked violently as it fired a concentrated pulse at the Council ship's power core. Time seemed to stretch as the energy blast shot forward, a brilliant beam of light cutting through the darkness of space. The Council's shields buckled under the force, the light of the explosion blinding everything in its path. The shockwave rippled through space, a thunderous roar that reverberated in the very fabric of the universe. Caldwell's breath caught in his chest as he watched the Council's command ship explode, its destruction rippling outwards in a spectacular display of fire and debris. Earth's forces had succeeded, but the battle was not yet over. The remaining drones were still coming, desperate to avenge their fallen masters. Caldwell's crew roared in triumph, but there was no time for celebration. The war was far from won. The remaining forces had to be neutralized, and Earth had to be ready for whatever came next. The fight for humanity's survival was still raging, but Earth had just proven something undeniable. No matter the odds, they would never give up. The debris from the destroyed Council command ship floated through the void, drifting in slow motion, like the aftermath of a great storm. The shockwave from the explosion had sent ripples through space, scattering the remnants of the mighty warship across the battlefield. Earth's fleet had delivered a devastating blow to the Council, but the final victory was far from certain. There were still remnants of the enemy fleet to deal with, and the drones, countless, relentless, were closing in on them with terrifying speed. Caldwell stood in the command center of his flagship, his eyes fixed on the tactical map that blinked with red lights, showing the locations of the remaining enemy ships. The Council's fleet had been severely crippled, but their drones, though disorganized, were still an effective weapon. The clock was ticking down, and the final waves of enemy drones were closing in fast, ready to engage Earth's forces in a final desperate battle. Status report, Caldwell barked, his voice sharp and focused. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. They had come so far. He couldn't afford to let everything fall apart now. Sir, the remaining enemy drones are swarming our position, the tactical officer reported, her voice strained as she read the data on her screen. They're moving in faster than expected. Our defenses are weakening. We're running low on ammunition, and several of our ships are still dealing with hull breaches from the earlier attack. The enemy is circling us, trying to box us in. Caldwell's mind raced as he processed the information. Earth had won a pivotal battle, but the Council wasn't finished yet. They were resourceful, and they would keep fighting until their last breath. The drones were a problem, small, fast, and nearly impossible to target with conventional weapons. But Caldwell knew they had to find a way to break through them. If they couldn't, Earth's fleet would be overwhelmed. We need a solution, now, Hayes said, her voice calm but determined. She stood beside Caldwell, her eyes scanning the battlefield outside the view screen. If we don't neutralize the drones soon, we'll be fighting a losing battle. Caldwell's gaze swept over the command deck, meeting the eyes of his officers. They were all exhausted, their faces drawn and weary. They had been through hell, and the end was still not in sight. But Caldwell knew one thing for sure: he couldn't give up. Not now, not when humanity's survival was on the line. Prepare the remaining fighters, Caldwell ordered. We're going in. We'll use the last of our ammunition and firepower to push through the drone swarms. Every ship capable of fighting, we fight. No one pulls out. If we go down together." The crew nodded, the tension in the room palpable. There was no choice now. Earth's fleet had to fight with everything they had left, or they wouldn't make it out of this war alive. "Captain," Hayes said, looking over at him, her voice soft yet filled with resolve, "you know what we're asking of everyone. This is the final push. If we can't break their will now, we're done." Caldwell's face hardened, his jaw clenching as he looked at the holographic map. The enemy drones were closing in, their numbers overwhelming. Earth's fighters, their last line of defense, were already engaging the drones, but their firepower was dwindling, and their ammunition was running low. Caldwell knew they couldn't keep this up for much longer. They had to find a way to disrupt the enemy's control, to break the drones' coordination, or the tide of the battle would turn against them. "Target their control vessels," Caldwell said suddenly, his voice sharp with newfound clarity. "If we take out the ships coordinating the drones, the rest will scatter. We'll cripple their offensive." Hayes' eyes lit up. "You're right. The drones are nothing without their command structure. If we can destroy the control ships, the drones will lose cohesion." Caldwell nodded. "Set course for the drone command vessels. Prepare to engage with everything we have left." As Earth's fighters maneuvered into position, Caldwell's fleet made its final approach toward the drone command ships. The enemy drones swarmed around them like a cloud of locusts, their weapons firing relentlessly. The battle had become a chaotic frenzy, with ships darting and weaving through the explosions, trying to evade the barrage of fire while targeting the critical control vessels. Caldwell's heart raced in his chest as the battle unfolded. His flagship took a hit, the impact sending a shockwave through the ship. The lights flickered, and the crew braced for the worst. But Caldwell's resolve never wavered. They had come this far, and they couldn't afford to back down now. With one final push, they would break the Council's will. "We've got to take out those control ships," Caldwell said, his voice low but filled with a dangerous intensity. "Hit them with everything we've got." The remaining fighters surged forward, their weapons flashing as they targeted the control ships. The Council's drones swarmed around them, but Earth's ships held firm, their coordinated fire cutting through the enemy's defenses. Slowly but surely, the control ships began to break apart under the relentless assault. Each explosion sent a ripple through the battlefield, and as the final control vessel exploded in a blinding flash, the drones suddenly faltered. Direct hit on the control ship. The tactical officer shouted, "The drones are scattering. They're losing their coordination." Caldwell let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. The battle wasn't over, but the tide had finally shifted in Earth's favor. The enemy drones, once a powerful and cohesive force, were now nothing more than disorganized remnants. Earth's fighters and remaining ships moved in quickly, picking off the scattered drones with ease. The remaining Council ships, their control over the battlefield shattered, began to retreat. Their will to fight was broken. Without their drones, they were nothing. Their fleet, once so formidable, was now a shell of its former self. "We've done it," Hayes said, her voice soft with relief. "We've broken them." Caldwell stood silently, staring at the view screen as the enemy fleet began to scatter and retreat into the depths of space. The battle was not without its cost, but the victory was undeniable. Earth had stood against the Council, against their overwhelming force, and had emerged victorious. "We're not done yet," Caldwell said, his voice steady as ever. "But today, Earth proved something the Council never saw coming. We're not just survivors. We're a force to be reckoned with." As Earth's fleet moved to mop up the remaining enemies, Caldwell felt a quiet sense of pride settle over him. The Council had tried to break humanity, to bend them to their will, but humanity had fought back. And now, for the first time, the galaxy understood just how powerful Earth truly was. The war was far from over, but the Council had learned a lesson they would never forget. Earth was not to be underestimated. And now, humanity had the strength to stand tall, to fight for their place in the stars. For Caldwell and his crew, the victory wasn't just about survival. It was about sending a message to the universe. Humanity would never kneel.